My big fear is that this administration's been more restrictive and more challenging to the press, more dangerous to the press, really, than any administration in American history.
All right, folks. Well, that's putting it mildly. Joining us now is the one and only Sharyl Attkisson, Emmy Award-winning journalist, former CBS News correspondent, and her great new book. It's finally out in a book. All of her tremendous stories, horrific stories, if you're a journalist. Stonewalled: My Fight for Truth Against the Forces of Obstruction, Intimidation, and Harassment in Obama's Washington. And here it is, in case we don't see it on the screen, which we should, but there it is. All right, Sharyl, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So good to see you in studio. When you hear a fellow journalist say that, and that's someone who's on the left, they're not a staunch conservative by any means, does that give you any kind of comfort, or does it really matter?
It does matter, and I would say it's not going out on a limb to say there now is a consensus among mainstream news media in things that they've said verbally, expressions they've made in letters to the White House. I'm talking about the New York Times, the Washington Post, ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, the White House Correspondents Association, the White House Press Photographers Association.
Quite a list, yeah.
They've all made formal and informal objections and observations about this administration, in some cases calling their actions regarding the press potentially unconstitutional, and general agreement that this is the worst administration for transparency that most of us have worked with.
All right, but you have been treated, I'd say, above and beyond in a category by yourself. Do you know of anybody else who has suffered what you have suffered at the hands of the administration?
Well, I would say James Risen faces potential jail time.
Yeah.
I would say James Rosen from Fox, to have his family intruded upon and himself like that. And of course, there's just several instances of reporters that have been probably followed and hounded in what I think is an overly aggressive way that is uncalled for.
All right, so what happened to you, and when people hear that your computer at work and your computers at home and your television, I mean, tell us what this has been like, and tell the folks who don't know and are just getting familiar with you and want to read about it all in Stonewalled, what you have been through and why.
Well, the book will set the backdrop for what kinds of stories I was covering, but there was a period of time in which there were so many electronic disruptions in my house associated with my FiOS service that sources, the CBS lawyers and friends were all saying, what is wrong? Is your phone tapped? What's happening? And of course, it was sort of a joke. And I had all the wiring replaced for the FiOS line at my house. Verizon couldn't fix it, but this was continual. Only when some sources came to me, two different sources, and said, you're likely being surveilled or monitored by the government because of the work you're doing. And at the time, it was Benghazi, but it had been other stories as well. And I took that kind of lightly, just because this is before we had the revelations about the Associated Press and Fox and Edward Snowden, and it sounded kind of far-fetched why the government would be surveilling you. But because of the disruptions, which may or may not have ultimately been forensically related to the intrusions, but that gave me a chance to reach contacts who then were able to get my computer looked at, first my CBS laptop that I was using at home, and forensically we've had 3 examinations that have confirmed highly sophisticated remote intrusions to both that CBS laptop at home and my Apple.
And who do you suspect, or do you know who was involved with this?
I have human resources that tell me who is involved, and I don't want to say that because it's a human source that can't come forward. So then I have forensic evidence that indicates, it's not my belief, it's what the forensics shows according to those who've looked at the computer, that there are government connections to the type of tactics used. And in one case it was described to me as software proprietary to one of the 4 federal secret government agencies.
NSA, DIA, CIA,
or FBI.
So you're convinced, through all the sources you just said, forensics, your on the ground source, your personal source, that it's one of those 4 agencies, or one or more of those 4 agencies.
Well, let's nuance that a little bit. It doesn't mean there's an official group at one of those agencies. We only know that there's software that's used by those agencies exclusively, supposedly, that's in the computer. It doesn't mean there's not a smaller group or a group outside the main groups that we know of that could be responsible for it.
And when did this start? This started with, was it Fast and Furious you're reporting on, or Benghazi? What was it?
We haven't identified the very first date that the intrusions came into the computers, but we know of a specific date in February of 2012. And we know the time, we know how it came in. The forensics was able to show the method used, the abilities that it had, and it's an ongoing process. People talk about a hack. There wasn't a hack that ended. There was an infiltration that continued with files being exfiltrated on a regular basis.
They had control of your computer, so they could go in and out, turn it on, turn it off, go in, go out. Is that what you're saying?
They had, according to the forensics, the ability to do just about anything they wanted to with the computer over a long period of time and refreshed it. I don't know why it would need refreshing, but the forensics shows they were back in there occasionally doing new things with the software and the spyware. And then at some point when we were discovering this, they tried to exfiltrate and cover their tracks.
We're going to come back and talk more with Sharyl Attkisson. The new book is Stonewalled, My Fight for Truth Against the Forces of Obstruction. Don't go away.